Imagine just for a second waking up tomorrow and finding out that 20% of the entire world's petroleum and liquid natural gas has just stopped moving. I mean, it's completely trapped. It can't get to the cargo ships, it can't reach the refineries, and it absolutely cannot get to your local gas station. So, what actually happens to the global economy when a disruption of that massive scale hits literally overnight?
Well, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most severe economic shocks of the modern era, the 2026 closure of the Strait of Hormuz. We're going to look at the hard data and frontline reports from this geopolitical crisis to see exactly how a localized conflict between the US, Israel, and Iran snowballed into a total global economic freeze.
Section 1. The ultimate maritime choke point.
You know, the physical reality of this geography is honestly pretty staggering. The Strait of Hormuz sits right between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. But here's the real kicker. The actual navigable channel for those massive supertankers? It's only 2 miles wide in either direction, just 2 miles. That is essentially a geographical needle's eye that a huge chunk of the global economy has to thread every single day.
To put that into perspective, right before the 2026 conflict, an estimated 20% of the world's global petroleum and about 20% of its liquefied natural gas, or LNG, flowed right through this tiny gap. We are literally talking about the lifeblood of global industry and transport, all funneled through a bottleneck that, as we saw, can be so easily shut down by modern warfare.
Section 2. The dual blockade.
So, a really crucial point here is that this closure wasn't just some simple line drawn in the water. It was a highly complex, two-sided barrier. On one side, right after the war broke out in February 2026, Iran laid sea mines, launched drone attacks on commercial vessels, and eventually set up this tiered toll system. They were charging ships over $150,000 just to securely transit the waterway. Then on the other side, you had the U.S. Navy jumping in by mid-April with a counterblockade. They were actively intercepting and diverting vessels that were trying to enter or exit Iranian ports, basically to choke off Iran's oil revenue.
And the immediate physical fallout of this dual blockade? Absolutely staggering. Tanker traffic dropped by 70% almost instantly. We saw over 150 ships just drop anchor outside the strait to avoid being targeted. By late April, the International Maritime Organization reported that 2,000 ships and roughly 20,000 mariners were physically stranded in the Persian Gulf. I mean, it was a total paralysis of maritime trade.
Section 3. The global energy shock. To really grasp the scale of this, listen to Fatih Birol, the head of the International Energy Agency. He did not mince words. He called this the greatest global energy security challenge in history. So this definitely wasn't just some regional headache. It was an existential threat to how the entire modern world powers itself.
And man, you can see exactly how the markets reacted. $139 a barrel for Brent crude oil in early March. That was the largest ever monthly increase in oil prices in history. The markets were absolutely terrified, frantically trying to price in a reality where the Middle Eastern oil tap was just turned off.
And this triggered a completely frantic global response. First off, prices surged uncontrollably. Second, the international community panicked and tapped into emergency reserves. IEA members, including the UK and the US, released a massive 400 million barrels of oil. And third, in a desperate bid to just get prices down, the US actually had to temporarily waive sanctions on Russian oil that was stranded at sea, and even briefly on Iranian oil too. It was a wild scramble for any available energy they could get their hands on.
Section 4. Shifting oil trade routes.
You know, energy is a lot like water. When a dam is built, it just finds a new path. And that shift created a profound disparity in how different nations were affected, which was heavily analyzed by the New York Times. The clear beneficiaries of this shock were countries outside the Gulf. The United States saw its export revenues jump by an estimated $50 billion, and Russia gained over $15 billion just from the surging prices and demand. Now, within the Gulf, geography was destiny. Saudi Arabia had pipelines straight to the Red Sea, which allowed them to bypass the strait completely. But the losers? Countries like Iraq, Kuwait, and Qatar. They had no alternative routes, meaning they were forced to slash their production and just watch their revenues absolutely plummet.
And the broader financial destruction across the board was immense. We're not just talking about lost revenue here, we're talking direct damage and massive wartime expenditures. The US military spent an estimated $25 billion very early in the conflict just on operations. Arab countries faced an estimated economic output loss starting at $120 billion.
And Iran, which was heavily targeted by strikes, assessed their own economic damage at a minimum of $300 billion, potentially even reaching $1 trillion.
Section 5. The cost of everything.
But here's the thing, it wasn't just oil trapped in the Gulf. This conflict exposed some massive hidden dependencies in our global supply chain. For example, nearly 50% of global urea exports, which is a really critical fertilizer for food production, transit this exact strait. So with it closed, global food security was immediately under threat. We also saw huge disruptions in jet fuel, aluminum production from places like Bahrain, and even critical helium supplies. Practically everything relies on this single waterway.
And that jet fuel shortage, it had very real, very fast consumer-level consequences. So much so that by May 2nd, 2026, Spirit Airlines, an American low-cost carrier that was already dealing with financial trouble, was completely forced into bankruptcy. Why? Because it simply could not absorb the astronomical costs of jet fuel driven by the war.
Which brings us to the final, heavy burden carried by the public. According to data from Brown University's Iran War Energy Cost Tracker, this conflict cost American consumers over $37.3 billion in additional energy prices in just a matter of months. That right there is the ripple effect hitting your wallet directly.
So, what does this all mean? The crucial takeaway here is that the 2026 closure of the Strait of Hormuz completely unmasked the fragility of the global economy's reliance on a single 2-mile-wide waterway. And it leaves us with a critical question to ponder. Even after the hostilities end and the diplomatic treaties are finally signed, how permanent will these costly new global trade routes actually become? Has the map of global energy been redrawn forever? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I hope this helps you understand the true gravity of this historic economic shock.